giving charity and, you know, the prayers and the fasting. I think all that's great. What I'm talking about, though, are very few particular doctrines that affect the other, us, the non-Muslim. And so when you're talking about Spain, for example, or, you know, a lot of people say the Jews ran to Ottoman Turkey because it was much better for them. That may well be true, but the fact is, under Islamic law then and today, a Jew or a Christian would have to live as a second-class citizen, period. Okay, a Christian's testimony at court would not be taken vis-a-vis a Muslim, for example. In certain periods, they were extremely handicapped, and you know they had to ride only donkeys. You can't ride a horse. You can't build a new church. Only the old ones maybe you can fix sometimes, and this is still going on in Egypt with the Copts. You know, all kinds of, and a lot of them, and the jurists say, all of these debilitations are meant simply to induce humiliation in accordance to verse 929. So it's this sort of, it's basically the whole concept of offensive jihad, which must go on when Muslims can do it, can undertake it militarily until the world is governed according to Islamic law, and the concept that those who do not want to convert, the dhimmis, the Christians and the Jews, have to live as second-class citizens. These are the problematic issues with Islam. The rest of it, like you're saying, it has a great history, you know, it had made many contributions, but these two issues are very pivotal to our understanding and our discourse with them.
I think the word humiliation, which you just brought up, is one of the most common words in bin Laden's vocabulary, at least. And I often wonder about his use of the term. Now, you take the case of Zawahiri, he was humiliated. He was tortured in prison. You know, and that's been the case of many of these Islamist radicals. And I think it accounts for the peculiar appetite for carnage that's so characteristic of al-Qaeda and separates it from any other terrorist group. I agree. But bin Laden was rich.
Playboy.
Well, he was never a playboy.
Right.
He was always pious.
I heard different things. I hear he used to go and hang out in Lebanon, but then I heard...
No, he was from an early teenage, he was always very, very pious.
Okay.
And so he never had the playboy stage that was part of the mythology about him early on. But nor was he ever physically humiliated the way that Zawahiri was. And yet he invokes this word again and again, and it resonates with many
Well, he's talking, I think, in general about the Muslim world as being humiliated.
Yes.
You know?
That it's been in retreat. And that there was once only one great empire, one great superpower.
Exactly.
And it was Islam.
And we have to go back to it. And we're even in the book, there's quotations that say basically, and it's hadiths that, of Muhammad saying that if you forfeit jihad and hold on to the tails of cows, and attend to your merchandise and trade, in other words, if you give up jihad, humiliation will overtake you until you return to your original position of jihad. He evokes that many times.
Yeah, I saw a videotape of him speaking in the bin Laden family mosque in Mecca, in Jeddah, right after he returned from the jihad and in Afghanistan. And he was saying, you know, if you give up your jihad and turn to money, God will send you a great humiliation. And this was what he was, you know, he charges the Muslims with, you have brought this on yourselves because you turned away from God's commandments.
Yes, that's exactly how, not just to him, but a lot of the radicals, quote unquote, that's their whole thing. That's why they're trying to awaken the ummah. Basically, you've lost your position of supremacy on the world because you've forfeited jihad and you've become lazy. Going back to the verse, fighting is prescribed for you, even if you dislike it. God knows what's best for you.
I'm fascinated by this movement that's going on right now in the Egyptian prisons, where members of the former leaders of Gama al-Islamiyya and al-Jihad, which was Zawahiri's organization, have recanted their views, and they are religious justifications for their change in perspective. That they attack, for instance, martyrdom, suicide operations as being un-Islamic. They attack the killing of others, you know, who are non-combatants. All of these things are very clearly prescribed by Islam, but have been excused by or justified by al-Qaeda, and now these prisoners, and it may be because they're prisoners, have issued some very interesting recantations that are being studied quite interestingly, I think, in a lot of them by Egyptians and other people in that part of the world.
Well, 2 points. First is, you're right. I mean, there's different, you can, as a Muslim, come up with a different interpretation. Now, how, is it as well-grounded as another interpretation? That's up to the individual. But that's the point right there, that in Islam, people can even come up with these violent interpretations because they're there, because of those many verses and those many hadiths and Sharia's laws, you know. So we can say even let's say a whole lot of Muslims will ignore it or reinterpret it in a modern sense. That doesn't change the fact that some will always take it literally. It literally says in the Quran, when you meet infidels, chop their heads off, like that Abu Musab Zarqawi used to do. It says in the Quran, it is not right for a prophet to make peace until he has caused slaughter in the land. Okay? And so, but the point is, there will always be some, and that's the problem. It took 19 to cause 9/11. We don't need an entire 1.2 billion ummah to do this, but as long as there's a handful, and considering the nature of the war that we're in, where it's not numbers that make a difference, thanks to technology, you know, and so it's ultimately, sure, let's say most Muslims don't agree with it. Some will always, and that's the problem. And the second point, you were talking about the killing of innocents and how that's obviously, you know, un-Islamic. Not so, Ayman Zawahiri would argue in that treatise. And he, again, does it through legitimate Islamic jurisprudence. For example, when it comes to the prohibition against killing women and children, which Muhammad did say, don't kill women and children. There's an incident, though, and it's recorded in the biographies and in the hadith, where when Muhammad was laying siege to the town of Taif, he used catapults. And so the jurists have concluded that, well, a catapult doesn't distinguish between women and children and men. It'll kill them all.
And so al-Qaeda uses that, comparing the airplanes to the catapult.
Exactly, exactly. It's the catapult thing has actually, in fact, been used by other scholars, Islamic radical scholars, to justify weapons of mass destruction because they kill indiscriminately. And the other hadith of a mujahid fighter came to Muhammad and said, is it okay to attack, you know, this town or village at night and set fire to their fortifications, knowing that there are women and children in there? And Muhammad's terse reply was simply, they, women and children, are from among them, infidels. And these are sahih, authentic hadith. So, and then Zawahiri brings up another interesting point. Based on this, he says, when these two incidences occurred, using the catapult and lighting fire, and in both incidences Muhammad approved, that was during an offensive jihad. In other words, that was when Muhammad and the Muslims were invading people just to spread Islam. So the logic, he concludes, if it's a defensive jihad, where according to someone like Ibn Taymiyyah, a very revered Islamic theologian, that is second to faith, and in a defensive jihad, surely we can do this stuff if they could have done it in an offensive jihad.
This has been a really interesting conversation, and I wish you luck with this book. And I think it's really important for all of us to study, you know, what our enemy actually says.
And the one thing we should not do is to apply our worldview on other people. In other words, I think we live in a very secular worldview, and even the religious elements, let's say, and the majority of people in America would be Christian. They have this subconscious idea that religion is totally separated from the sphere of politics and the world. Jesus said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, unto God what is God's, spiritual and material. So we should not make the mistake of applying that worldview to the Muslim world, because in Islam it's extremely different. It's a very legalistic religion. It's not so much spiritual, unless you're a Sufi, and they make up 2% of the Muslim world. But it's very much caught up in the now and what you do. It's very legalistic. It's sort of like Judaism in that sense, traditional Judaism. So we shouldn't discount what they say and say, oh, they're just, you know, using some kind of theology to just make a point. They do take it seriously.
Thanks very much, Raymond.
Thanks for having me, Larry.
It's a pleasure.
Pleasure.
Public Affairs, History and Biography. You're watching Book TV on C-SPAN 2. Coming up, Pulitzer Prize-winning author Glenn Kessler reviews Condoleezza Rice's tenure as Secretary of State in his just-published book,